John, we've talked about liabilities. How can an agency manage its risk?
I think the thing to say on that is that your average agency will have to up its game on its supply chain due diligence. Some are very good, but even the ones that are really good at their supplier due diligence will probably need to add an extra layer on top of that. But in practical terms, an agency probably will need to look at its preferred supplier list if it has one, and do a couple of things. One is, I would suggest, look at reducing the number of umbrellas on that preferred supplier list in many cases. Depends how many they've got already, but if they've got 12 on it, they may want to reduce that number significantly because they're going to have to do quite a lot of due diligence on those 12. So purely work-wise, if they've only got 3, it's a lot less work for them to do.
Would it be fair to say, because of also ongoing audit and checking on them, then it's going to be too hard to manage if there's too many?
Well, exactly, because I think the second bit to that is that due diligence in the umbrella world used to be sort of looking backwards. Did they have an accreditation with a body which was met certain standards? Were they able to answer certain questions of the agency in terms of their commercial practice? Could they look on Companies House and see who the directors were at a fixed point in time? All that sort of stuff. Now that's got to be done in real time because it's not just what you did in terms of your retrospective operation of pay as you earn, it's what you are doing today in respect of the worker that I am placing with you today. The PAYE that's being deducted from the worker today is how do I know that that's going to be paid over to HMRC tomorrow or next week or next month. So there's got to be a lot more real-time checking and transparency in the supply chain in terms of where the money's going and has it been paid over to HMRC at the right rate and at the right time. So if you're doing that for a huge list of umbrellas, you've got a huge amount of work. You're going to need several full-time people just doing that check for you. So I predict that list is going to get reduced because otherwise you're going to have people on there that you are just not looking at properly.
Would it be fair to say if you are a smaller agency, you just won't have the resource to manage that properly, so it needs to be tighter?
It can work both ways. A large agency will have potentially lots of workers and potentially large liabilities, so they'll be wanting to manage their liabilities with bigger numbers. But a small agency, will just not have the resources to be able to do all of that.
Conversely, smaller liability, but a smaller that'll still have a big effect on the smaller agency.
Yeah,
so
you're
it's all horses for courses.
Yeah. So I think if you're a medium to smaller sized agency, it's even more important to make sure that you're putting your business through an umbrella that you can trust.
But we've also got further legislation coming along, which is, and you're going to get it right far better than myself, which is the legislation covering promotion of tax avoidance schemes.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our mini umbrella scenario. Will those directors get caught up in that scenario? And in effect latches on to this umbrella legislation in effect. And you may not get caught by the umbrella legislation, but you're going to get caught by the tax avoidance legislation.
So there's lots of legislation now aimed at basically calling people to account for bad practice around tax avoidance. So there's definitely promoting tax avoidance legislation. There's also the corporate criminal offence legislation, which has been around for a few years and hasn't yet shown its teeth. There's a case going through the courts now, so we're all watching that with great interest.
The legislation is there already.
It's definitely there.
And also going to be enhanced.
I think over the few years, over the forthcoming years, that legislation will be used more effectively by HMRC. And again, if it's not causing bad practice to be done away with, I'm not talking about simple errors. I'm not talking about things where people make mistakes. I'm talking about arrangements where somebody makes a decision to avoid tax. So an agency director doesn't have strict liability, but if they find themselves as an agency promoting tax avoidance, then they've got to be really careful of other legislation.
Promoting's got a really wide reach, hasn't it, really? It's not, hey, come and do this. It's being part of it, really, isn't it, in simple terms?
It's being part of the club.
Being part of the club,
Yeah.
and turning a blind eye is no excuse. Or I didn't know, because you must have known, because there's no way on God's earth that's ever going to stack up, because there's not enough money in the pot.
Yeah.
And it fails the smell test, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a legal term, but we all know what it means.
In order to avoid a culprit criminal offence, you have to have controls in place which show that you've taken certain levels of care, etc. So if a rogue employee goes against that, then you've got a defence against that legislation. However, if you've not got the controls in place, or even worse, it can be seen that you are knowingly turning a blind eye to bad practice, then you're into much more serious legislation than just paying over the pay-as-you and then NIC liability. And then that can be looked into all sorts of things, not just that element of how you operate with your umbrellas, but how you operate across your whole taxes. So I think probably the way to answer your question is if you are an agency, you can no longer, not just because of this legislation, but because of all sorts of other wider legislation, you can no longer turn a blind eye to bad practice by your best billers.
Would it be fair to say, just to kind of wrap this bit up, and I suppose where I was trying to take the conversation, is these are the umbrella legislation with the joint and several, the corporate criminal stuff, the tax promotion stuff. It's all part of a bigger picture, which is HMRC and government, Treasury, etc. It's a culture change. It's saying we've had enough. This is what we're going to do. You're going to have to really smarten up in your supply chain. The bandit days have gone. Get your house in order. Yeah,
I think the days where avoiding tax was almost a game to people, and those days have gone. So it's no longer. The lines are blurred between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Lots of cases have been out there where you've got to not only be paying the right amount of tax, but you've got to be showing that you've got the right controls in place. So this is just the latest in the set of legislation, which is moving the goalposts so that large organisations in particular, but any entity has got to be doing the right thing and arguably being seen to do the right thing. And if in doubt, they'll end up with a liability if they can't show it otherwise.
So, John, big question. How does an agency manage its risk?
So you've got to do more real-time checks, simply because it relates to the liability that's being generated for the worker that you've placed today with that umbrella today that's getting paid tomorrow, for example.
So what did they do then?
All of what they've done before still probably has to be done, but they've got to add a layer on it. They've got to, I think, if they don't already, look a lot more into the umbrella company that they're looking to appoint and make sure that they've got great creditworthiness. So dare I say it, that they're not likely to fall over tomorrow, and that they've got to have an element of cash in the business to keep them going. So we're working on an enhanced due diligence project between now and next April in order to help our clients carry out those additional checks. And I'll mention a few, but there'll be loads more, I'm sure. But it is things like, have they changed the year end? Have they changed their directors? Have they got any ongoing HMRC disputes? Have they got, even if they've got an accreditation, has there been anything within that accreditation which has given them an extra few months, a year to get their house in order over a particular issue?
And some accreditations are better than others.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. But then there's also, the big thing is the transparency in the operation of PAYE. So I appreciate that these payroll checking organisations, and they're great, but you need to make sure that you've got that information in real time. It's not sufficient to go, well, your last PAYE bill was due 3 weeks ago. Has that been paid on time and to the right figure? Because that's great, but what's happened in the next 3 weeks? That might be enough to tip that umbrella over the edge, because if they can't pay that PAYE, then there's issues. And also, going back several years, have they been doing things which HMRC are inquiring into them at the minute, and that's just not crystallised any liabilities yet.
And also, there's reputational risk as well.
Yeah, so I think the thing here, which is, I'm not sure people necessarily understand it as well as they need to at this moment, is there are things that can happen to the supply chain which creates a liability today, that then creates a liability for the agency tomorrow. So it's not just sufficient to know that they're operating PAYE on your workers last month. It's what are the umbrella doing around their liabilities in previous years. So we talked earlier around bad practice a few years ago may come home and haunt you at a future point and create liabilities for an agency if they didn't know about that when taking that umbrella onto their PSL. It's a little bit like knowing that you've got certain independent accreditations which are relatively recent, but you've then got to check in real time. So what do I mean by that is that in an ideal world, and I appreciate it's an ideal world, but you really ought to be able to almost picture yourself looking over the shoulder of the umbrella company and going, right, I am placing Fred Smith with you. I can see Fred Smith's money going through from me, your margins coming through, the expenses being deducted. That amount is the right amount going on payroll. PAYE and NIC is being correctly allocated to that money. That money is then being paid over to HMRC and I can see it go through. I can trace that through onto HMRC's government gateway and I can see that you've paid it. And it's not, that happens now for accreditation processes for last month, the month before, but in a perfect world you should be able to do that almost at random today and look at that going through in real time.
With this umbrella legislation, the Joint and Several Liability, can we start getting into where liability goes to? Because we have in the recruitment umbrella sector some very convoluted, technical supply chains.
Yep.
Are end clients ever liable?
So the short answer is yes, they can be, depending on what sort of supply chain we're talking about. So it's not a usual supply chain, but the first one to mention is where an end client goes direct to an umbrella. So if an end client doesn't have an agency, but they place some of their workers that they have with an umbrella, and then the umbrella doesn't operate pay-as-you-earn and NIC correctly, under the new legislation, that end client will be liable for that liability. So that's not likely, and I don't see that very often, but it does occur. The more common example, which I think is probably taken a few people by surprise, is that if they engage an agency to pay their workers, and that agency puts them under an employment contract direct, and then doesn't operate PAYE and NIC correctly, then the end client will be caught by this transfer of liability, this joint and several liability legislation, and will be liable for the agency's failure to operate pay-as-you-earn and NIC.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of agencies haven't quite caught on to that at the moment. How are end clients reacting with everything that's going on?
So I'm not sure end clients at the minute in the main fully know what this legislation means for them, and some of them may not even know that legislation's coming along the pipe, particularly around their potential liability if they engage with agencies direct and the agencies employ the workers. So there will be more due diligence required by them. I'm expecting particularly the larger organisations.
And has that started already?
Started. I think the best way of putting it is they look at things in bite-sized chunks. So they'll look at, if they have self-employed workers, they'll look at what controls they've got in there. If they've got PSCs, personal service contracts, they'll have a look around IR35. So they'll have controls in this. This bit of it is the next stage in what their controls need to be. And dare I say it, I'm expecting most end clients, particularly the larger ones, to start taking a holistic view of all of this and saying, right, labour supply chain, no matter whether they're self-employed, limited company contractors, umbrella agency workers, whatever else it may well be, let's have a look at the whole lot.
So what I'm taking from this is it's not just they're concerned and they will be concerned about potential liability, but it will also be, because you've extended it into other products, if I can put it in those terms,
Yep.
They're also going to be worried about reputational risk as well now. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair, yeah, because firstly, they'll be making sure that there is no liability likely to leak through. Secondly, there's absolutely the reputational damage that could be caused by workers not being paid or by HMRC plastering their name across the press because of tax avoidance schemes or whatever. But there's also the commercial side of things as well. if you've got lots of temporary workers or contractors and the like being utilised by your business, you want those workers to be happy. You want them to be being paid on time. You want them to be being effective in the work that they're
stay
doing.
on site as well.
You don't want them out of the business because they're not being paid. If the umbrella goes bump or the agency doesn't pay them, that has a knock-on commercial impact on you as a business. And we've seen lots of instances of that over the years.